Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody, and today we're going to be looking at the Ulthwe Craftworld. Now, this Craftworld has been an original for a while. It's one of the original Craftworlds, and it has a lot of cool special rules this time around, very powerful special rules, and a lot of people overlook this Craftworld, I think, when looking at the competitive scene, because the far-flung Craftworlds are much more customized and much more versatile when it comes to unit selection. But I actually believe that Ulthwe can still be competitive while remaining lore-friendly. So what does lore-friendly mean? Just a quick definition. Lore-friendly means that you are adhering to the lore of the Craftworld, which is, Ulthwe has a lot of guardians. They're better trained than other guardians, and they have a lot of warlocks and farseers and things like that. So what exactly are the goals of this guide? So the goals of this guide are to give you an overview of the Craftworld specifics and unique rules to the Ulthwe Craftworld, give you a little bit of insight into the effective units and combos of the Craftworld, things you can do with the units and how they interact, and also some advice on how to remain lore-friendly while also being competitive and effective on the tabletop to make the most out of your army while still remaining somewhat true to the lore. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about the Ulthwe army bonus, which is Foresight of the Damned. So there's several abilities here, which is always good. But essentially it starts off with each unit can reroll one wound roll, whether they're shooting or fighting. And this is every time they select to shoot or fight. So that could technically mean both if you do both in the same turn, which is really good. This can add up over the course of the game. It's not individually great, but over a course of a game, you're re-rolling one wound roll every single time you roll to wounds with shooting or fighting. That's pretty effective. Also, each psyker that makes its first psychic test in a turn can add +1 to that roll. That really gets the ball rolling, so to speak, and is really effective at tilting the curve in our favor, the dice curve, so that we can pass more psyche tests more often, especially since we have Strands of Fate and things like that as well to help us out. Now, the two remaining special rules have to do with survivability. So each model in the army gets a 6+ invul save, and that's every single model, vehicles included. And also each model in the army also ignores mortal wounds on a 5+. So basically, if they would lose a wound due to a mortal wound on a 5+, that wound is not lost. That is incredibly effective, especially against psyche powers and things like that. And especially with the new Tyranid book that just came out, a lot of their creatures deal an insane amount of mortal wounds. The ability to ignore these on a 5+ is exceptionally good. And honestly, just really awesome. So they ignore mortal wounds on a 5+, the entire army. Now, the unique battle stratagem that Ulthwe gets is called Discipline of the Black Guardians. So essentially what this does is, in either your shooting phase or fighting phase, you select an Ulthwe Guardian unit, and you can add +1 to that attack's hit roll. So essentially what it does is, if you're hitting on 3s normally, you're going to be hitting on 2. And especially when we're talking about Guardians, let's say Guardian Defenders, this allows you to hit on a 2+, and Guardian Defenders specifically can reroll 1s when, within range of an objective. So that actually basically allows them to hit on a 2+ with the rerolls. Storm Guardians are kind of the same. They can do pretty much the same thing in combat, but I think Defenders are, to be honest with you, much more effective units. I don't really like Storm Guardians. I want to like Storm Guardians, don't get me wrong. And even in an Ulthwe list where I think Storm Guardians could technically have some sort of place, I still think Guardian Defenders might be slightly better. But again, if you have, some experiences with Storm Guardians running Ulthwe, please let me know and tell me how they worked out in your list. I'd love to know how they actually perform. And also, this ability can also apply to support weapons. So in an Ulthwe list, you'll typically have at least one support weapon battery. And this support weapon battery could be, Shadow Weavers or D cannons, or, even Vibro cannons. Although, honestly, I don't think Vibro cannons are the optimal choice. And now, with the Shadow Weaver and D cannon, they are indirect fire weapons, so this does help alleviate some of the penalties to that. That were just introduced in the last round of nerfs. Now, the Ulthwe relic is called the Ghost Helm of Al-Shazir. And basically what it does is allows your Psyker to know one additional Psyche power from the Runes of Fortune Discipline. And each time a Psyche test is taken for the bearer on an unmodified 9+, that Psyche power cannot be denied. So I originally looked at this and I didn't really think it was that great. In fact, I looked at unmodified and I thought, oh man, you really just have to roll a 9+ straight up. You can't even use Strands of Fate. And then somebody, a kind subscriber or watcher, commented and said, oh, actually, Strands of Fate counts as unmodified as well. So that was awesome. So then I was like, okay, awesome. So basically, what you can do is you can make sure that a lot of your psychic tests in your psychic phase from this Farseer are undeniable. So essentially what that means is that you only need a 3+ on one of the dice if you use Strands of Fate to modify one of them to a 6 to make that power undeniable. So that's really useful, especially against, a lot of enemies out there are going to want to deny your Guide and Doom because those are your most powerful abilities. And to have the Ghost Helm on this Farseer with Guide and Doom is really effective at preventing that. So your opponent can't really deny your psychic powers as well. Now, the Ulthwe Warlord trait is called Fate Weaver. It basically allows you to retain an additional dice on your Strands of Fate. By itself, I wouldn't think this is the strongest trait. But when you think about it in terms of the Ulthwe Craftworld in general, the fact that you're going to be wanting more psychic test dice so that you can get those unmodified 9s and get those higher procs so that, the enemy can't deny your psyche tests as effectively. This is actually a decent trait to have on one of your, on your Warlord or another character if you spend a command point for the Champion of the Eldar ability. And I actually think this is maybe, a little bit underrated because I originally looked at this and thought, well, not that great, but in an Ulthwe-centered list that revolves around a lot of Farseers and a lot of, Psykers in general, if you can retain another, Strands of Fate roll that's a Psyche test, that would be really effective. So it does depend on what your Strands of Fate roll is. If you, like, for example, get another Strands of Fate of, an advance roll, for example, which I think is probably the worst one out of the bunch. If you get an advance roll, yeah, of course, it's not going to be that good. But in most cases, you'll be getting something that's at least semi-useful. Now, the units that work well with Ulthwe that I've found looking at the Codex are Guardians, support weapons, Warlocks, Farseers, and Spirit Seers, of course, have synergy, Rangers, and surprisingly enough, Wraith Lords and Wraith units, Wraithguard and Wraithblades, as well as Fire Prisms, are very effective in Ulthwe-centered lists. And let's go ahead and talk about how these units are effective in Ulthwe lists. So, obviously, we're going to start out with Guardians. Now, Guardians have two variants, the Guardian Defenders and the Storm Guardians. In my opinion, the Guardian Defenders work much better, especially in Ulthwe lists because they are more accurate. They have a greater threat range, and typically they're just, kind of more effective in general. They put out more damage. They have a high volume of fire, which becomes extremely accurate with the Black Guardian stratagem, especially near objectives when they're rerolling 1s to hit on their shuriken weapons. So this includes shuriken cannons if you actually choose to put that on your platforms, which is a pretty effective choice, although an Eldar missile launcher is also a good choice. They're actually tougher than normal Guardians of other Craftworlds because they get a 6+ invul, and they get a 5+ ignores mortal wounds. Both are great abilities, which, kind of improve their survivability. And then their platform or special weapons, if you're using Storm Guardians, can reroll 1 wound. Now, that may not seem that great, but, when you are running Guardian units, you're not going to want to reroll the, Shuriken Catapults. You're going to want to reroll the heavy weapon. So this is really effective for making their heavy weapon platforms more effective for their points cost. And then we have support weapons. So support weapons have the Guardian keyword, so they count as Guardians in terms of the Black Guardian's ability. And the Black Guardian's ability can help them negate the penalties to direct fire. They become naturally tougher, being Ulthwe with 6+ invul, and 5+ ignores mortal wounds. This helps them prevent Psyker bombing, which some Psykers do employ. And essentially what this means is it means casting a lot of high power, Witchfire abilities that can take you out in a single turn. And this includes, a lot of Tyranid models who maybe aren't Psykers, but do mortal wounds. And rerolling 1 wound isn't that bad on these guys. It's a minimal thing, but it's still useful in my opinion. So you have those 3 things going for them. And then next up, we have Warlock, Spirit Seers, and Farseers. So obviously these guys are good with Ulthwe because they get +1 to their first Psychic test cast each turn. This is very effective for, casting higher level powers, especially the ones in Runes of Battle, which require a 7+ usually. And their 5+ ignores mortal wounds is also pretty good, especially on a unit that relies on invulnerable saves and is especially vulnerable to mortal wounds, which honestly the enemy will probably want to put on Warlocks because they're tough, because they have multiple wounds apiece. They have invul saves that are pretty decent. Your enemy this will probably be a high priority target for your enemy. So being able to ignore mortal wounds on a 5+ is pretty useful. And also Spirit Seers have a lot of synergy with Wraith units. And Wraith units, believe it or not, are actually very good in Ulthwe lists as well. There's a lot of benefits there to taking at least 1 Spirit Seer in your list. And they get +1 to their psychic powers and stuff like that as well. So, Rangers, actually, you might not think they have much synergy at all with Ulthwe. And usually I would say, yeah, they're not Ulthwe. They're Alatolic. Gosh, that's hard to pronounce. But basically, Rangers, they become a little bit tougher. Which is decent. They get the 5+ ignores mortal wounds, 6+ invulnerable save. But the real reason you take them is because they work well with support weapons. And I'm talking about the Resonator Shard stratagem. Basically, when a unit of Rangers is within 12 of an enemy unit, you can use this stratagem. And you can actually reroll all support weapon hits while enemy units are within 12 inches of a Resonator Shard unit. So this is actually fantastic, especially if you're running multiple support weapons, because it helps negate a lot of the accuracy issues that indirect fire weapons have now with the new penalties to indirect fire. So they're really good for that. They're also just good in general for scoring on objectives, different things like that. And honestly, rerolling 1 wound per unit isn't bad on a sniper rifle, especially if you can get that 6 and, cause a mortal wound. So they're really not that bad with Ulthwe, and on a lot of lists with support weapons are actually needed. Next up is Wraith Lords. Now, Wraith Lords are already awesome, but in Ulthwe, they get a 6+ invul, which is fantastic. 5+ ignores mortal wounds, makes them really tougher than they already are, which they're already extremely tough. They can reroll 1 wound because of their Craftworld trait as well, and this is really good because Wraith Lords have really high impact weapons, so this is very useful on them. And because they're a dual role, they could use this ability in the shooting and fight phase if they actually charge. And they're great for supporting either Guardian Defenders or Warlocks because both of those units have trouble getting through heavy armor. And both of those units are susceptible versus tougher combat units like Terminators and things like that. And Wraith Lords just basically demolish Terminators in close combat. So Wraith Lords, pretty good. synergy with Ulthwe. And also Wraithguard and Wraithblades have great synergy with Ulthwe because they basically benefit from the same kind of things that Wraithlords do. They benefit from the mortal wounds and the 6+ invul. Of course, Wraithguard probably benefit more from the 6+ invul because they don't already have one. This makes them extremely tough. They get a 5+ ignores mortal wounds, which is fantastic. A lot of people will aim mortal wounds at Wraithguard just because they have high armor, and the Ghost Axes and Force Shield combination is really susceptible to mortal wounds. And honestly, rerolling the wound roll isn't that bad either. Wraith Cannons especially. If you want to reroll a Wraith Cannon wound, that's actually really good because, Wraith Cannons are high-impact weapons. So this is really effective on Wraithguard and Wraithblades. I would definitely recommend thinking about taking a couple of these units in your list. Fire Prisms are also very good with Ulthwe. Now, a lot of people might look at that and say, well, do they really have that much synergy with the Ulthwe faction? And they actually do. And the reason why is because they're a little tougher than normal. They have a 6+ invul save, 5+ ignores mortal wounds. This helps them evade damage. So they're more accurate throughout the game. And they also have the Lance Shot, which pairs really well with the reroll to wound. So both of these bonuses together actually make Fire Prisms pretty effective in Ulthwe lists. And that's not even to mention the fact that because Ulthwe typically has more Farseers, and with the Ulthwe Relic that allows you to retain additional strands of Fate dice, there's modified dice rolls that could be used more, especially on Linked Fire. You could use, the Linked Fire stratagem on 2 Fire Prisms to really devastating effect, modifying one wound roll to a 6, and re-rolling another can be extremely powerful on models, especially with the Lance profile. Now, when I say this, I only mean the Lance profile. I think the other profile, the Dispersed Shot, is actually pretty garbage, and in most cases is not that great for killing infantry, and honestly is only slightly better at killing light infantry than the Lance is, which is kind of disappointing. And just to clarify, when I say light infantry, I mean things like Eldar units, units that have one wound or maybe don't have a lot of armor. So things like Tempestus Scions, Eldar Guardians, Tau Fire Warriors, things like that, which have a fairly low save. I think with the new Armor of Contempt changes, the Dispersed Shot is even, kind of even worse at dealing with Space Marines in general. And in some cases, it might even be worth just lancing regular Marines, depending on the situation. So I'm going to just do a quick creator's note here. I'm going to give you guys kind of a list in the next couple of minutes that outlines what an Ulthwe army could look like on the tabletop, on paper. And this is only given as an example of things you could bring in an Ulthwe list to make it effective, while at the same time remaining lore friendly. Because to be honest with you guys, this is the list I'm going to show you is by no means an optimized or most competitive Ulthwe list. By no means at all. It's only meant kind of as a template to give you an idea of how an Ulthwe army might look when put together, with its different stratagems and command point usage and so forth. So let's go ahead and take a look at it, let's get started. So right off the bat, this is going to be a Battalion Detachment. So I believe the Battalion Detachment is the best for most Eldar lists at 2K because it offers a lot of flexibility in unit selection and things like that. It does cost 2 command points to have this detachment, but when your Warlord's a part of it, it refunds the command cost. And technically, this is a Strike Force game. It's at 2,000 points, and your starting command points will be at 12 command points. So for the HQ section, we have 2 Farseer Skyrunners and a Spirit Seer. And the reason why I do Skyrunners is because they're more mobile, they're faster, and can get away from trouble easier. They also have a pretty decent shooting attack, so in a pinch, they can actually do some decent damage with that. It's not the main reason you take it, but, it's not bad. Now, here's the thing. The first one has Guide and Doom and Focus Will. And I went ahead and just for the sake of an example, gave him the Ghost Helm of Ali Shazir, which allows him to take Focus Will. Now, what you would do technically on this is you would cast Focus Will first, and then you would cast Guide and Doom afterwards. So essentially, Focus Will basically gives a Psyker +2 to his Psyche tests and +2 to his Deny the Witch tests for the battle round. So that's going to give him better casting ability and better denial ability. And the casting ability is really important because your enemy is probably going to want to single this guy out to try to deny his psychic powers. Guide and Doom are extremely effective psychic powers, and your opponent's going to do everything he can to shut those down. So, you know, Focus Will does help with that. Then you have a Farseer Skyrunner with Fortune and Will of Azurian. So basically what this guy's job is he's going to be casting Fortune on units that you expect to take a lot of firepower that turn. He can also make that unit objective secured. So Wraithguard and Wraithlords being objective secured is very effective because they can hold down objectives really well. And he also makes them tougher, so he makes them harder to kill in general. And in addition, he has the Sunstorm Relic, which you can get from using the Relics of Eldar stratagem for 1 command point. And I actually went ahead and gave him Fate's Messenger for another command point from the Champion of the Eldar stratagem. So you don't have to do this. You don't have to give him the Fate's Messenger. I just threw it in there because it makes him a little bit tougher, makes him a little bit better able to survive in the late game when he is capturing objectives on his own. So gives him a little bit of survival there. And lastly, a Spirit Seer with Ghost Walk. This would technically probably go in a Wave Serpent or something like that. And he's more of a tech piece, mostly for his Spirit Mark ability, which helps Wraith units wound easier. And also his Ghost Walk ability, which helps, you know, slower units like Wraithguard to get into combat. He has Seer of the Shifting Vector, which allows him to basically gain command points when anybody uses a command point through a stratagem. You can roll a dice, and on a 6, you can gain a command point yourself. And that's for 1 command point from the Champion of the Eldar stratagem. So I actually think it's worth it to spend a couple of command points in the beginning of the game on things like this, especially in Ulthwe, because what it'll do is it'll really allow you to have some versatility in your HQ selections, and they'll be able to do a lot of different things. Like, for example, the Farseer Skyrunner could be used as a support with Fortune and Will of Azurian just in the backfield supporting, or he can also be used as a unit to grab objectives himself. So, you know, that makes him really versatile and really effective on the battlefield. Of course, you have your standard Farseer with Guide and Doom. That's pretty much every list is going to have one of those. And then you have your Spirit Seer, which is really good with Wraith units, and you're probably going to have a couple Wraith units in your army. And the other thing about this, actually, is this allows your Tears of Vicious stratagem to be more powerful as well. So that's for the HQ. Now, for the troops, very simple. We only have 3 options here. Now, I did put in a unit of 20 Guardian Defenders. Now, it depends on your playstyle. If you don't like Guardian Defenders, if you want to trade them out for Rangers and maybe, you know, add a few more, add a few more of other choices or add another elite choice, whatever. But I think Guardian Defenders can actually be very effective with this setup. And the reason why is because under the Black Guardians stratagem, they can actually get Ballistic Skill 2+. So they can hit on 2+, and when they're on an objective themselves, they are able to reroll 1s to hit. So they get 2+ with rerolls. That's pretty good with a large unit. On top of this, I have chosen in this list to deploy them with the Webway Strike stratagem for 1 command point. And essentially what this allows you to do is come in on any objective that you want, essentially, on the board. Use them as either a defensive force to help support other elements of your army, or use them as an offensive force to press your enemy in certain areas of the board that he might be weak in. So this gives you some versatility. I also gave them 2 Eldari missile launchers because they are a versatile platform and they have a lot of range. So if you need to come in on a part of the board to capture an objective that is maybe far away from enemy units, you can still threaten them with long range. And in addition, if you do have an Eldari missile launcher, you can use the Skyhawk missile stratagem when needed. So if you're going against a Tyranid player and he has, you know, something like, I think it's called the Harpy or something like that, or the Tyranid Flyer, that's an absolute menace right now. You can use that Starhawk missile, and actually the Starhawk missile is not bad. It's a good option to have in your back pocket if you need a couple more mortal wounds to deal to an enemy unit like this. It's very effective. It auto hits, and you know, it does mortal wounds. So that means it ignores armor and ignores invuls. Excuse me, I said auto hits. It gets +1 to hit. My bad. It gets +1 to hit. But yeah. Okay, so then you have 2 ranger units. Now the thing about rangers is they're basically good in every list, because they have a lot of versatility. They can deploy a lot of different places, but mostly they're good at the objective game, and especially rangers are good. Rangers, I gave one of them a wire weave net, and this is just because if you place your rangers correctly, you can actually benefit from the resonator shard, and especially if you pair that with support weapons, you're re-rolling all of your hits on your support weapons on enemy units within 12 of these guys. So having a wire weave net on these on one of these units at least that's going to be within 12 of an enemy unit is useful, because they're probably going to either charge you next turn or, well, if they shoot you, you're probably going to die anyway. But if they choose to charge you, at least you'll do some mortal wound damage before you go. And maybe you can even force them to fail a charge with the -2 to the charge rolls that they get. And then moving on to elites, we have kind of a diverse selection here, but you'll notice that the mainstay of this is that they have 2 warlock units, 5 warlocks each. That allows them to have 2 powers, and that allows them to cast 2 powers. They don't take up elite slots because of the Seer Council special rule, because you have 2 Farseers. Not that it matters that much, but one of your warlock units has Protect and Jinx, Quicken and Restrain, and the other one has Enhanced Strain, Empower, and Enervate. And these units are basically just used for debuffing. They're used to make your Guardian Defenders more effective. They're used to make your shooting more effective and your combat as well more effective and your enemy less effective. So these pair exceptionally well with the Wraith Blades that I put in this list as well. Wraith Blades with Ghost Axes and Force Shields. Could possibly use Webway Strike, or it could be put in a Wave Serpent, depending. There's options for both in this list. And lastly, we have a Wraith Lord with 2 Scatter Lasers, 2 Flamers, and the Ghost Sword. This is the quote-unquote Firestorm variant of the Wraith Lord. I put this in to deal with hordes. So, you know, typically Warlocks and Wraithguard with Wraith Blades don't like dealing with a lot of chaff infantry. They don't do well against that. So the Wraith Lord is there to clear out, you know, things like Termagants and Hormagaunts and things like that from swarming you and making your small elite army less effective. And the Wraith Lord can also protect those same units against highly, you know, really tough monstrous creatures, things like Hive Tyrants and stuff like that. If a Wraith Lord can get into combat with a Hive Tyrant and is allowed to strike first, he can definitely do some serious damage and possibly even kill the Hive Tyrant with lucky enough rolls and buffs and things like that. So, you know, pretty diverse elite selection and really supports each other and works well together. And lastly, well, not lastly, but for heavy support, we have 2 Fire Prisms. This is to make use of the linked fire stratagem. One of them has a crystal targeting matrix, just so that if you do link your fire, that one can ignore the negative modifiers to hit from cover. And you have 3 support weapons with D-cannons. Now, honestly, the D-cannons aren't necessary. You could easily save some points and go with Shadow Weavers. It's up to you, but I would definitely choose either D-cannons or Shadow Weavers to make the most out of the Black Guardian stratagem, giving them additional hit chances, and just the indirect fire abilities that they have in general are very effective. So yeah, we got 3 support weapons with D-cannons. Oh, and also one more thing. The Shadow Weaver and the D-cannon benefit from the Resonator Shard ability that the Rangers have as well. And unfortunately, the vibro cannon does not. So that's that. Now, this heavy support selection is just a lot of anti-tank, but you could easily change this around if you wanted to. The support weapons could become Shadow Weavers, and you could make the Wraith Lord more anti-tank, or really whatever you wanted. The Wraith Blades, you could switch to Wraith Guard. There's a lot of different things and changes and modifications you can make to this list to make it suit your own play style a little bit better. And finally, lastly, we have the dedicated transports in our list. We have 2 Wave Serpents. They just have shuriken cannons. We're just keeping them cheap. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're going to put our Wraith Guard and Warlocks in here with the Spirits here. And we're going to support those with a Wraith Lord. And this is kind of, and of course the Farseers as well. And this is just to kind of present a mobile attacking force that you can also use to protect your Warlocks from any enemy shooting, and your Wraith Blades as well. I mean, Wraith Blades are tough, but you don't want to, expose them to unwanted firepower. Let's just put it that way. So we have 2 dedicated transports. Wave Serpents are among the toughest models in the game, and especially with the 5+ ignores mortal wounds, Wave Serpents are incredibly tough in Ulthwe lists. And basically, this list is going to be using about 4 to 6 command points during deployment, and this really depends whether or not you want to use the second Webway strike for 3 command points. If you want to put 2 units in the Webway instead of 1 unit, this will depend how many command points you use right off the bat. This will depend on the mission. This will also depend on what your opponent has and so forth before you decide to use that second Webway strike. And then this would leave about 6 to 8 command points remaining to use during your first battle round, which will honestly give you a pretty good foundation on which to use stratagems like Black Guardians, Resonator Shard, things like that, all your alpha striking abilities that you want to get off turn 1 before you lose those units. You'll have more than enough command points to utilize this, and throughout the game, you're going to be generating more command points with Seer of the Shifting Vector, as well as just gaining a new command point every turn from being battle forged in the first place. So, in conclusion, I think Ulthwe can actually be a very strong Craftworld. I think they have some of the best Craftworld traits out of the named Craftworlds. And I also think that they can really remain lore-friendly because their special rules really benefit the units that, believe it or not, are lore-friendly. So, Warlocks, Guardians, support weapons, these kind of units, Farseers, for example, are really good in Ulthwe. And I really think it's cool that, especially in the Ulthwe Craftworld, Guardians, that are normally one of the worst units in the Codex, are actually pretty good with Ulthwe. And in fact, they're so good that you would, honestly, in my opinion, be amiss to not take at least 1 unit of Guardians in your Ulthwe list to benefit from the Black Guardian stratagem, and also to benefit from the increased survivability and stuff that they get on top of that, including, rerolls to wound for their platforms and stuff like that. So overall, really do think Ulthwe is a strong Craftworld. I think that, it's a really fun Craftworld to play with a lot of psychic powers. And I think that a lot of players would enjoy doing it. And you can still remain competitive. If you're worried about losing all of your games, don't worry. Ulthwe is a strong Craftworld and can be competitive when used correctly, with the correct units and strategies and so forth. Okay, everybody, I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. And again, if you guys have any kind of insights into Ulthwe, if you've been playing Ulthwe for a long time and have found something or discovered something that works very well, let me know in the comments. I would love to, add this into a future video or something like that. I'd love to take your strategies and stuff into account. So let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.